I am Liam. I am 28 years old. Exactly 28 months after my spine was permanently shattered and bolted back together with titanium, my own flesh and blood, my older brother, violently pushed me out of my wheelchair onto the hard, sun-baked concrete of my parents' backyard patio. While I lay there bleeding, struggling to breathe through blinding neuropathic pain, my family did not rush forward to help me. They laughed. My brother, Derek, stood over my broken body, his face heavily flushed with anger and day drinking, and yelled those cruel words right at me. "Stop faking for attention. Get up." And they actually cheered him on. 60 of my own relatives, people whose blood I share, people who watched me grow up, stood in a tight, eagerly watching circle and recorded my public humiliation on their phones like it was some kind of twisted, highly anticipated halftime show. But there was one crucial detail that absolutely none of them knew. The man standing quietly at the very back of the yard, holding a paper cup of gas station coffee and wearing a simple navy polo shirt, was not a lost neighbor looking for his dog. He was my orthopedic surgeon. He had been recording the entire assault from the exact moment he walked through the heavy wooden gate. And right now, my golden boy brother is begging for mercy while facing severe felony charges that will completely and permanently ruin his entire existence. Before I tell you exactly how I destroyed his perfect, meticulously crafted life and legally took everything he valued, hit that like button if you firmly believe in absolute, undeniable justice. And please, let me know exactly where you are watching from in the comments below. Your support means the absolute world to me, and it actively helps get this story out to people who might currently be suffering in silence under the crushing weight of a toxic family. Now, let's go back to the exact moment my family finally showed me their true, unapologetic faces. The concrete hit my elbow first. The impact was incredibly sharp and sudden, sending a brutal, sickening shockwave straight up the bones of my arm and directly into my shoulder joint. That initial impact was followed almost instantly by the terrifying crunch of my right hip slamming against the uneven patio stone. And finally, the side of my skull cracked violently against the ground. It was not quite hard enough to knock me completely unconscious, but it was exactly hard enough to make the entire physical world tilt violently and stay tilted. The bright blue, cloudless August sky, the towering oak trees lining the property, the expensive, Edison-style string lights my mother had spent all morning frantically hanging across the wooden deck. Everything slid sideways like a picture frame that someone had intentionally knocked completely off the wall. There were at least 60 people crammed into my parents' sprawling, meticulously landscaped backyard. The heat was absolutely suffocating. It was that heavy, oppressive, humid Midwestern air that physically presses down on your chest and makes it incredibly hard to pull in a full, satisfying breath. I could smell the rich, heavy smoke billowing from the massive charcoal grill, the sweet, sticky tang of expensive barbecue sauce burning slightly on the hot iron grates, and the sharp, deeply metallic copper taste of my own blood pooling in my mouth where I had bitten deeply through the inside of my cheek when my face hit the ground. My sister-in-law, Nora, stood rigidly near the edge of the patio. She raised her perfectly manicured hand to cover her mouth. It was not a gesture of horror or empathy or basic human concern. She was covering a dark, satisfied smirk. My Uncle Vernon, a man who built his entire personality around his stock portfolio, already had his expensive, brand-new smartphone out. The bright red recording dot glowed menacingly in the harsh afternoon sun. He was making absolutely sure he captured every single humiliating second of my degradation for his own private amusement. My brother Derek stood towering directly over me, his broad chest heaving up and down under his designer shirt. He had been actively hyping himself up for this exact, brutal confrontation for 2 solid years. He had been telling himself a deeply fabricated, entirely self-serving story where he was the righteous, brave hero finally exposing a lazy, manipulative fraud who was dragging down the family name. "Get up, Liam," he demanded. His voice was incredibly loud, aggressively projected so forcefully that the neighbors 3 houses down could undoubtedly hear every single syllable. It did not sound like a brother talking to a brother. It sounded exactly like an accusation delivered by a ruthless prosecutor in a crowded courtroom. I lay there completely helpless, pinned against the hot, unforgiving stone. My custom-built wheelchair, the incredibly complex piece of medical equipment that cost more than most reliable used cars, was tipped violently on its side 2 feet away from my head. One of the large, rubber-coated rear wheels was still spinning slowly, silently slicing through the heavy summer air. My right leg had folded completely underneath my body at a profoundly unnatural, grotesque angle. That single, jarring movement sent a blinding, white-hot flash of absolute, pure agony straight up my compromised spinal cord. It is a very specific kind of pain. It is the kind of pain I had spent the last 28 agonizing months painstakingly learning how to navigate. It is the kind of pain you have to actively learn how to breathe around, taking shallow, calculated sips of air so you do not simply pass out from the sheer intensity of the neurological misfires. It is the kind of pain that completely and utterly erases the sharp edges of your peripheral vision, turning everything gray and vibrating, and makes every single sound around you, the laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, seem like it is coming from miles away and deep underwater. And the massive family reunion just kept going right around me as if nothing of consequence had occurred. The upbeat country music blaring from the expensive outdoor Bluetooth speakers did not stop, nor did anyone bother to lower the volume. A younger cousin, entirely oblivious to the gravity of the situation, chased a bright red plastic kickball right past my head, his sneakers slapping the concrete inches from my nose. I was absolutely nothing to them. I was just a broken piece of patio furniture that a strong gust of wind had knocked over. I was a minor, pathetic inconvenience temporarily interrupting their potato salad, their cold beers, and their deeply entrenched gossip. I said, "Get up, Liam," Derek barked again, taking a heavy, deliberate step closer to my face. The sheer, unadulterated satisfaction vibrating in his voice was unmistakable. He was finally doing it. He was finally putting me in my designated place out loud, in broad daylight, in front of everyone who ever mattered to him. He desperately wanted to strip away my last remaining shreds of dignity and watch me physically crawl like a wounded animal. He wanted a full, tearful confession of my supposed deception. I placed my scraped palms flat against the rough, sun-baked stone and desperately tried to push my upper body off the ground. My arms shook violently, the weakened muscles immediately spasming under the strain, and then they completely, pitifully gave out. I collapsed back down. The harsh patio stone had aggressively peeled the top layer of skin right off the thick heels of both my hands. I could literally see tiny, sharp pieces of gravel and dirt pressed deeply into the raw, red meat of my palms. Little beads of dark, thick blood began to rise up around the grit, mixing slowly with the dust and my own cold sweat. Derek turned his back to me and faced the eagerly watching crowd, spreading his arms wide like a slick corporate lawyer delivering a career-defining closing argument to a captivated jury. He aggressively pointed a finger back down at my trembling, broken body. This was his grand finale. This was the exact moment he had meticulously rehearsed in his head during every single family holiday, every tense phone call, every time my overwhelming, crushing medical bills were casually brought up in conversation. He was completely ready to execute my character publicly and permanently. But he was completely, tragically blind to his surroundings. He had absolutely no idea that his ultimate executioner was standing perfectly still right behind him. Dr. Harrison was silently observing every single micro-expression, holding the exact, indisputable digital weapon that would effectively and permanently end Derek's lucrative career, his vast hoarded wealth, and his precious freedom forever. To truly, deeply understand the sheer magnitude of the betrayal that unfolded on that concrete patio, you have to fully understand the 28 months of pure, unadulterated, isolating hell that preceded it. I am a proud veteran. I served 4 rigorous years in the Army National Guard. Before the accident completely derailed my existence, I was the inherently athletic one in the family. I was the guy who casually ran half marathons for local charities, the guy who spent his precious weekends helping friends haul heavy oak furniture up 3 flights of narrow apartment stairs without breaking a sweat, the guy who absolutely never sat still. My body was my ultimate tool, my independence. Then came the fall. I was actively helping a fellow unit member entirely clear out a dilapidated, poorly maintained commercial storage facility when a heavily rusted, structurally compromised metal staircase completely gave way beneath my heavy work boots. There was no warning creak, no time to grab a railing. I simply dropped. I fell 2 full stories straight down, landing squarely and violently on compacted, rock-hard dirt and jagged, discarded scrap metal. I did not lose consciousness immediately, which is perhaps the cruelest part of the memory. I remember the exact, sickening sound my spine made when it completely shattered upon impact. It sounded exactly like a thick, dry, ancient tree branch violently snapping in half during a hurricane. The subsequent emergency surgery at Northwestern Memorial Hospital took over 7 grueling, bloody hours. Dr. Harrison, universally recognized as one of the most respected, brilliant, and utterly ruthless spinal surgeons in the entire state, meticulously opened up my back and literally, mechanically bolted my shattered vertebrae back together. I woke up days later in the sterile, beeping intensive care unit with 4 thick, heavy titanium rods and 12 massive screws permanently fused directly into my L3 and L4 vertebrae. The physical structural damage to my bones was catastrophic, but the severe, irreversible nerve damage was the true, unending nightmare that awaited me. My right sciatic nerve was permanently crushed and mangled in the brutal impact. When ordinary, able-bodied people casually hear the phrase nerve damage, they almost always assume it simply means numbness. They think you just casually cannot feel your leg anymore, like when you sit on your foot funny and it falls asleep. They are entirely, completely wrong. Neuropathic pain is highly active. It is aggressive, malicious, and it is entirely relentless. Imagine someone taking a thick, heavily rusted roofing nail and driving it directly into the center of your kneecap with a heavy steel hammer, and then simultaneously running a high-voltage, unpredictable electrical current right through that metal nail. That is exactly what my right leg feels like every single minute of every single day, 24 hours a day, without pause. The severe nerve damage also completely and permanently destroyed my proprioception. My brain simply, fundamentally no longer knows exactly where my right foot is located in physical space. That terrifying reality means my leg can simply give out underneath me, collapsing like a wet noodle, without even a fraction of a millisecond of warning. Therefore, I require a highly customized, heavily reinforced wheelchair just to navigate my basic daily life inside my apartment. Furthermore, I require a highly specialized, custom-molded composite leg brace that alone costs $4,500 out of pocket, just to be able to stand up for 5 agonizing, sweat-inducing minutes during closely monitored physical therapy sessions. But my family resolutely did not look at the dense medical charts. They explicitly refused to look at the undeniable titanium rods glowing stark white on the X-ray films. They obviously could not physically feel the raw electricity violently burning through my veins. All they saw, all they cared to see, was the exorbitant financial cost, the lowered social status, and the massive, undeniable inconvenience I had suddenly become to their perfectly curated lives. In the deeply twisted, highly competitive dynamic of my family, Derek was the undisputed, untouchable golden boy. He was 32 years old, a slick, fast-talking, aggressively ambitious vice president of sales at a massive cutthroat logistics firm downtown. He pulled in a massive 6-figure salary that he made absolutely positively sure everyone in the extended family knew about. He aggressively drove a pristine, black luxury SUV, exclusively wore custom-tailored Italian suits, and most importantly, he directly managed our parents' substantial retirement accounts, their lucrative 401k portfolios, and their extensive, highly profitable real estate investments. He was the phenomenally successful son they eagerly bragged about to their wealthy friends at the exclusive country club. I, on the other hand, was the severely broken, permanently defective son they had to awkwardly, shamefully explain away at dinner parties. The devastating shift in their behavior toward me did not happen overnight in a massive explosion. It was a slow, toxic, incredibly corrosive drip of resentment that steadily built up over months. It started subtly with the crushing, overwhelming medical bills. My private insurance company aggressively fought tooth and nail, utilizing an army of corporate lawyers, against covering the full, necessary cost of my long-term inpatient rehabilitation and the heavily modified, expensive and I absolutely needed just to drive myself to mandatory medical appointments. My mother, Sylvia, complaining the entire time, had to quietly co-sign a high-interest loan against their fully paid-off house to help me briefly cover the massive financial gap while my claims processed. I promised her, looking her dead in the eyes with absolute sincerity, that I would pay her back every single cent directly from my military disability back pay the very second the complex federal paperwork cleared. But the ugly seed of financial resentment was permanently planted and meticulously watered. Thanksgiving dinner, exactly 1 year after my devastating, life-altering accident, was the major, undeniable turning point. I was sitting quietly at the far end of the long, beautifully decorated dining table in my bulky wheelchair. Derek was standing proudly at the head of the table, smoothly pouring very expensive, heavily aged red wine into delicate crystal glasses, complaining loudly and aggressively about his high tax bracket and how the government was actively stealing his hard-earned money to fund social programs. I just fundamentally do not understand why the hard-working, highly productive members of society constantly have to subsidize people who simply refuse to actively contribute. Derek announced smoothly, his tone dripping with condescension, staring directly and aggressively at me over the rim of his expensive wine glass. Some people figure out pretty quickly that cashing a guaranteed monthly disability check is a whole lot easier than actually dragging themselves out of bed and earning a real salary. They just milk the system. They milk their own generous families dry until there's nothing left. I gripped the black rubber armrests of my wheelchair until my knuckles turned completely, starkly white, the blood draining from my hands. My own brother was openly calling me a lazy parasite right to my face in front of the entire family. I looked pleadingly down the table at my mother, desperately expecting her to immediately shut him down, to fiercely defend her injured son. She just looked down at her expensive porcelain plate, pushed her mashed potatoes around silently with her silver fork, and took a small, incredibly quiet bite. My father, Richard, a man who worshipped financial success above all else, cleared his throat loudly and immediately changed the subject to his recent, incredibly frustrating golf swing. That deafening, cowardly silence from my own parents was their official, unmistakable endorsement of his cruelty. They truly, deeply believed I was lazy. They fully believed I was a massive, calculated burden who was slowly and intentionally draining the substantial inheritance Derek felt rightfully, exclusively belonged to him. A few short weeks after that horrific dinner, the final, devastating nail was aggressively driven into the coffin of our relationship. I was rolling slowly through the massive kitchen of my parents' house to get a simple glass of tap water. My mother had been furiously cleaning off the granite kitchen counter and quickly sorting the massive pile of Daily Mail. I looked down by chance into the large plastic trash constituted heavily by the island and saw a thick, heavy manila envelope prominently displaying the logo of Northwestern Memorial Hospital resting casually on top of wet coffee grounds and discarded eggshells. It was the comprehensive, highly sensitive medical packet containing my latest, incredibly detailed MRI results, the complex, undeniably objective nerve conduction studies, and the stark, uncompromising, permanent prognosis written personally and signed by Dr. Harrison. I had practically begged my parents to sit down and read that exact document so they could finally understand the hard, irrefutable medical science behind why I could not just try harder to walk like a normal person. I painfully reached down, fighting the burning in my spine, and pulled it out. They had not even opened it. The thick glue seal on the flap was completely, perfectly unbroken. They threw my entire medical reality, the undisputed scientific proof of my daily torturous suffering, straight into the garbage because it was so much vastly easier to blindly believe Derek's convenient, financially motivated narrative. It was infinitely easier to firmly believe I was a manipulative con artist than to accept the horrifying, tragic reality that their youngest son was permanently disabled and trapped in constant agony. They absolutely, fundamentally refused to deal with the complex grief of losing the son they knew, so they conveniently and ruthlessly replaced it with blame. The environment rapidly became incredibly hostile and deeply toxic. When my Aunt Brenda went through a vicious, highly publicized divorce and fought a brutal, expensive legal battle for full custody of her teenagers, the entire family eagerly rallied around her like a well-funded army. When she definitively won the bitter lawsuit, they threw a massive, fully catered party with an open bar. But when I finally won my brutal, exhausting 6-month appeal with the insurance company just to get a specialized, medically necessary foam wheelchair cushion to prevent life-threatening pressure sores, Derek violently rolled his eyes in profound disgust and muttered loudly that I was acting like I had just won the state lottery. I became completely, totally isolated. I stayed firmly locked inside my small, accessible apartment, deeply dreading any forced, highly scrutinized interaction with them. But the family dynamics were about to sharply turn from passive-aggressive to openly, aggressively dangerous. The fatal spark that ignited the final, catastrophic explosion came directly from my younger cousin, Tyler. Tyler was 24 years old, deeply and hopelessly in debt from a useless, entirely unmarketable college degree, and absolutely pathetically desperate to get his hands on some of Derek's massive salary to immediately pay off a looming high-interest loan. Tyler knew exactly what Derek desperately, obsessively wanted to hear. So, Tyler maliciously fabricated a completely false story and handed Derek exactly the highly explosive ammunition he needed to completely destroy me. The fateful phone call from Aunt Brenda came on a dreary, rainy Tuesday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks before the highly anticipated annual summer family reunion. Aunt Brenda was exactly the kind of woman who treated simple family gatherings and neighborhood HOA meetings like highly strategic, life-or-death military campaigns. She thrived entirely on absolute control and complex emotional manipulation, always expertly hiding her pure, unadulterated venom behind a sickeningly sweet, deeply concerned Southern Belle voice. "Liam, sweetheart, you simply have to come to the family reunion this year," she cooed smoothly through the phone receiver, her tone dripping with entirely fake empathy. "Your poor, exhausted mother is just absolutely sick with worry about you hiding away in that dark, depressing apartment all by yourself. It is like you are actively treating your medical condition like an ongoing funeral. You need to be around family. We genuinely miss you so much. Brenda, the backyard is completely inaccessible for my chair. There are steps, and the grass is too soft," I replied flatly, staring blankly at the cold rain hitting my living room window. "And nobody there actually wants to see me. They just want to stare at my paralyzed legs and whisper nasty theories behind my back. That is entirely in your head, Liam, and it is very selfish and cruel of you to say," she snapped back immediately, the fake, sugary sweetness dropping for a fraction of a second to boldly reveal the cold steel underneath. "Do not intentionally break your mother's fragile heart. Be there at noon sharp. Dress nicely for the family photos. We are hiring a professional photographer." She hung up the phone abruptly before I could even formulate a proper argument. I sat perfectly still in the quiet, sterile environment of my living room, staring blankly at the black, reflecting screen of my cell phone. I knew deep in my gut, with absolute certainty, that I was walking directly into a carefully laid trap, but I did not realize exactly how carefully and maliciously the snare had been fully constructed until my father called me 2 days later. My father, Richard, never called me unless someone had died, or he urgently needed me to walk him through fixing a basic computer issue that he was too stubborn to Google. I answered the phone on the second ring, my stomach already tying itself into tight, painful knots. "We need to have a very serious, final talk about your little act, Liam," my father said immediately. His voice was freezing cold, completely devoid of any parental affection, warmth, or benefit of the doubt. "What act, Dad? What on earth are you talking about? Do not play stupid with me. It is insulting to my intelligence." He barked loudly into the phone, his anger instantly flaring. "Tyler saw you. He saw you at the local grocery store last Thursday evening. He said you confidently parked that ridiculous, incredibly expensive handicap van, got right out of that damn wheelchair, and walked straight into the store carrying a massive 50-pound bag of dog food on your shoulder. He said you walked perfectly fine. No limp, no brace, no pain. Just a perfectly healthy young man." My blood ran completely, terrifyingly ice cold. It was such a blatant, ridiculous, medically and mathematically impossible lie that for a long, dizzying moment, my brain simply could not properly process the words he was saying. "Dad, I do not even own a dog. I haven't owned a dog in 5 years. And last Thursday evening, I was at the downtown chronic pain clinic getting a massive, incredibly painful spinal epidural steroid injection just so I could sleep through the night without screaming. I have the official hospital paperwork right here on my desk. I have the discharge papers physically signed by the attending nurses and the doctor on call. Tyler has absolutely no conceivable reason to lie to this family. My father interrupted violently, his tone harsh and terribly, permanently final. But you do. You have a very expensive, very comfortable, fully subsidized lifestyle to maintain on our dime. Derek is absolutely furious about this revelation. He is already looking into hiring a top-tier aggressive lawyer to take immediate legal action to protect your mother's real estate assets, the family business, and the inheritance from you. He says it's disability fraud. I strongly suggest you show up to the reunion on Saturday, stand up on your own 2 feet like a man, and publicly apologize to this entire family for this sick joke, or you are completely, irrevocably cut off. Permanently. Do not test me. He slammed the phone down so hard it made my ear ring. I sat perfectly, unnervingly still in my wheelchair, the heavy, suffocating silence of my apartment ringing loudly in my ears. Tyler lied. He completely, maliciously fabricated a deeply damaging story out of thin air because he absolutely knew it would make Derek overwhelmingly happy, and he knew Derek had the massive salary and the financial power to completely bail him out of his disastrous financial situation regarding his entirely wasted college fund. And my parents, the people who brought me into this world, the people who raised me, actively and consciously chose to instantly believe the broke, desperate, heavily indebted, lying nephew over the concrete, irrefutable medical records they deliberately and maliciously threw in the garbage. This was absolutely no longer just about toxic family resentment or the inconvenience of my disability. This was a highly coordinated, vicious, strategic effort to frame me as a criminal fraud. They were actively, intentionally building a massive false narrative to legally and socially cut me completely out of the family, to fiercely protect their precious, hoarded inheritance, and to finally aggressively wash their hands of the broken, disabled son. If they could successfully convince themselves and absolutely everyone else in their social circle that I was entirely faking, they would not have to feel a single ounce of crushing guilt for totally abandoning me in my darkest hour. I slowly wheeled myself over to my small desk, my heart hammering violently against my ribs in a slow, steady, terrifying rhythm. Deep, genuine anger is a very funny, highly unpredictable thing. When it gets hot enough, when it burns aggressively past the point of blind rage, it actually turns completely, terrifyingly freezing cold. I did not want to cry. I did not want to scream loudly or violently punch a hole in the drywall. I wanted to burn their entire fabricated, hypocritical house of cards to the absolute ground, and I intensely wanted them to watch it burn while realizing they lit the match. I calmly opened my laptop and deliberately pulled up my secure, password-protected hospital patient portal. I systematically found the direct, private office number for Dr. Harrison. It was a massive, almost absurd long shot. Top-tier, highly sought-after orthopedic surgeons are incredibly busy, massively powerful people. They definitively do not get involved in petty, toxic family drama. But Dr. Harrison was definitively not just any surgeon. During my darkest, most utterly terrifying days in the inpatient rehab facility, when the relentless, agonizing neuropathic pain made me seriously, rationally want to end my own life just to make the burning stop, he sat silently by my hospital bed for a full, uninterrupted hour after his brutal 12-hour surgical shift ended, calmly talking me down from the absolute ledge. He deeply, profoundly understood the complex psychological warfare of severe, life-altering physical trauma. He hated injustice almost as much as he hated spinal decay. I dialed the number with a perfectly steady hand and firmly demanded the receptionist put me directly through to his private line. When he finally answered, sounding deeply exhausted, I did not waste a single precious second of his time with pleasantries. Dr. Harrison, it is Liam. I need a massive, completely unprecedented personal favor. I explicitly explained the entire horrific, deeply twisted situation to him. I told him in detail about the unopened medical records residing in the kitchen garbage can, about Derek's highly aggressive, lawyer-backed financial threats regarding the family inheritance, and about Tyler's completely fabricated, utterly malicious grocery store story. I told him with absolute certainty that I was walking directly into a fully loaded firing squad on Saturday afternoon, and I desperately needed an entirely unimpeachable witness. I needed a highly respected, heavily credentialed medical professional with ultimate, unquestionable authority to stand physically in that yard and verify objective, undeniable reality to a mob that wanted to execute me. Dr. Harrison was entirely silent for a long, deeply agonizing moment. I could clearly hear the faint, rhythmic scratching of a heavy pen on paper on his end of the secure line. "Liam," he finally said, his deep voice dropping low and becoming dead, terrifyingly serious. "I have actively treated severe spinal trauma patients for over 25 years. I have personally seen affluent families tear each other to absolute shreds over money, wounded pride, and sheer physical inconvenience. I have watched wealthy parents completely abandon their own flesh and blood because they simply could not handle the depressing aesthetic reality of a highly visible wheelchair in their perfect living room. What exact time does this ridiculous party start?" "Noon. I will be there exactly at 1 o'clock, he said firmly, leaving absolutely no room for debate. "Do not tell a single, solitary soul I am coming. Let them show exactly who they are." I hung up the phone. A deep, profoundly unsettling, incredibly dark calm washed entirely over my body. I was absolutely not going to a fun summer family reunion anymore. I was going to a highly volatile, active crime scene, and I was bringing the lead medical investigator directly with me. Saturday arrived with a punishing, relentless, utterly suffocating wave of intense heat. I drove my heavily modified, incredibly expensive Honda Odyssey van slowly up to the cracked curb directly outside my parents' massive, imposing suburban house. The heavy hydraulic ramp whined loudly and mechanically as it slowly lowered my heavy wheelchair onto the uneven concrete driveway. The entire, perfectly manicured street was completely lined end-to-end with the highly expensive, freshly washed cars of my various relatives. Before I could even forcefully roll myself toward the large wooden backyard gate, my Uncle Marcus pulled up violently to the curb in his pristine, dark blue Porsche 911. He revved the powerful, finely tuned engine aggressively before finally killing the ignition, ensuring that absolutely everyone in a 3-block radius implicitly knew he had arrived. Marcus confidently stepped out, wearing a crisp, entirely unwrinkled designer polo shirt and highly expensive mirrored sunglasses, looking exactly like a walking, talking billboard for extreme midlife crisis wealth and unearned arrogance. "Liam!" he shouted obnoxiously over the sleek, polished roof of the expensive Porsche, a nasty, highly condescending smirk firmly plastered on his aging face. "Still aggressively riding around in the taxpayer-funded luxury chariot. I see. Must be incredibly nice to have your poor mom foot the massive, ongoing bill for the gas while the rest of us actually get up and work for a living every day." He did not wait for any sort of response. He just violently slammed his heavy car door shut and marched purposefully past me, aggressively pushing through the heavy wooden gate without offering even a slight pause to hold it open for my bulky chair. I took a deep, intensely steadying breath, tightly adjusted my grip on the hot metal hand rims of my wheels, and slowly, deliberately followed him directly into the heart of the lion's den. The sprawling backyard was absolutely packed. There were at least 60 people loudly scattered across the perfectly manicured, bright green lawn and the massive, expensive stone patio. Aunt Brenda was aggressively, loudly holding court near the massive, overflowing buffet table, meticulously organizing the bowls of potato salad and the highly expensive cuts of meat like a deeply deranged military field marshal. My mother, Sylvia, was nervously, repetitively wiping down perfectly clean folding tables with a damp rag, entirely refusing to make direct eye contact with anyone who passed by her. The exact, precise moment my heavy wheelchair tires rolled onto the hard concrete of the main patio, the entire social atmosphere violently shifted. It was intensely palpable, exactly like a sudden, terrifying drop in barometric pressure seconds before a violent tornado touches down. Loud conversations immediately dropped in volume to a low, buzzing murmur. Eyes darted aggressively toward me, deeply judging, intensely assessing, and then quickly, cowardly darted away. I was the giant, highly inconvenient elephant in the room, the ultimate pariah they had all gleefully gathered to judge, convict, and eventually execute. I quietly parked myself near a large, shady oak tree on the far edge of the concrete, intentionally and strategically staying entirely out of the direct flow of heavy foot traffic. Absolutely nobody brought me a cold drink. Nobody casually asked how I was doing, or how my grueling physical therapy was progressing, or if I needed any assistance navigating the uneven grass. Tyler, the cowardly architect of the despicable grocery store lie, actively and visibly avoided making any eye contact with me whatsoever, cowardly hiding his face behind his girlfriend near the large, ice-filled coolers of expensive imported beer. About an hour into the incredibly tense, painfully awkward party, Derek finally emerged grandly from the house. He was confidently holding a large plastic cup heavily filled with craft beer, his face already heavily flushed from aggressive day drinking. He walked straight, with intense purpose, into the absolute dead center of the patio, laughing incredibly loudly at a minor joke someone made, purposefully making absolutely sure he was the undisputed center of everyone's attention. His heavily made-up fiancée, Nora, trailed quietly and submissively behind him, looking slightly uncomfortable with the intensely aggressive energy, but entirely unwilling to verbally challenge him in front of his adoring family. Derek's cold eyes swept the busy yard and instantly locked aggressively onto me. I saw the thick muscles in his square jaw tighten violently. He took a long, highly deliberate drink from his plastic cup and started walking directly, menacingly in my direction. The surrounding relatives immediately noticed the aggressive movement. The casual, light chatter began to die down rapidly until the yard was eerily silent. People instinctively, excitedly formed a loose, highly expectant semicircle around us, drawn entirely to the impending violent conflict like starving wild animals to fresh, bleeding meat. "So," Derek said incredibly loudly, stopping exactly about 5 feet from my chair, ensuring he had the entire yard's undivided audience. "I hear you have been doing some incredibly heavy lifting lately, casually hitting up the local stores, effortlessly carrying massive 50-pound bags of dog food on your perfectly healthy shoulders. It is a completely miraculous medical recovery, Liam. Praise the Lord for this absolute, undeniable miracle." A few older uncles chuckled meanly and deeply in the background. Aunt Brenda aggressively stepped forward from the crowd, tightly crossing her arms over her chest, ready to strike. "We have all explicitly heard the absolute truth about it, Liam. It is truly, deeply disgusting. Your poor, exhausted mother has been losing sleep, secretly taking out second mortgages just to support you, and you are running casual errands and walking perfectly fine when you incorrectly think nobody is closely looking. I do not own a dog, Brenda," I said, intentionally keeping my voice incredibly, unnervingly steady, projecting it clearly and loudly across the suddenly dead silent yard. "And Tyler is a pathological, desperate liar. On Thursday evening, I was at the downtown chronic pain clinic getting a massive, terrifyingly long needle driven directly into my damaged spine." Tyler's face instantly turned bright, guilty, burning red from across the wide patio. "I saw you," he yelled loudly from the absolute back of the crowded gathering, his cowardly voice cracking slightly under the immense pressure. "I know exactly what my own 2 eyes saw. You saw a pathetic, completely transparent opportunity to get Derek to pay off your massive, defaulted college fund debt because you are entirely broke and deeply desperate." I shot back fiercely, locking eyes directly and intensely with Tyler. He visibly, physically flinched backward and immediately stared hard at the grass, unable to hold my gaze. Derek violently and aggressively slammed his heavy plastic cup down hard onto a nearby glass patio table. Cold beer sloshed heavily over the rim and dripped loudly onto the hot stone. "Do not you ever dare call my younger cousin a liar to desperately cover up your own garbage, manipulative behavior," Derek snarled viciously, taking a massive, highly intimidating step closer to me. He was aggressively looming directly over me now, violently invading my tight physical space, actively trying to intimidate me with his sheer height and physical presence. I could strongly smell the stale alcohol and the overly expensive, cloying cologne radiating aggressively off his flushed skin. "You deeply think you are so incredibly, remarkably smart," Derek continued, his angry voice echoing loudly off the brick side of the large house. "You actually think you can just successfully leech off this family's hard-earned money forever without any consequences. You are a massive, embarrassing drain on Mom and Dad. You are a massive financial liability to my future. This whole pathetic wheelchair act, it is deeply, truly pathetic. You are just too incredibly lazy to get a real promotion or a real job. You actually want to talk about actual, objective reality, Derek?" I asked softly, intentionally keeping my hands resting loosely and completely relaxed on my wheels, entirely refusing to break my intense eye contact with him. "Or do you just desperately want to boldly perform this little, pathetic play for your captive audience?" That single, entirely defiant sentence pushed his fragile ego completely over the absolute edge of human reason. Uncle Marcus instantly and excitedly pulled his expensive phone out of his pocket and held it up extremely high, the camera lens aimed directly and unblinkingly at us. "I am actively recording this right now," Uncle Marcus announced proudly, his voice booming to the eager crowd, "for the permanent legal record. Because it is about damn time somebody finally held you legally and socially accountable. I deal with complex lawsuits against pathetic frauds all the time, and I know exactly how to document this evidence." The large crowd murmured in loud, excited, highly vocal agreement. My mother stood completely, terrifyingly frozen near the large sliding glass door, her trembling hands clutched tightly over her chest. She actively watched her eldest, golden son verbally abuse and threaten her permanently disabled youngest son, and she did absolutely, positively nothing to stop it. She let the abuse happen. "Accountable?" Derek whispered darkly, a highly cruel, incredibly ugly smile spreading slowly across his deeply flushed, angry face. "Yeah, let's physically hold you accountable right now." He lunged forward with explosive, entirely unhinged speed. Before I could even begin to brace my deeply compromised body, Derek violently grabbed the heavy metal armrests of my wheelchair with both of his large hands. With a violent, twisting, incredibly forceful upward heave, he aggressively yanked the entire heavy chair entirely sideways. Gravity instantly and ruthlessly took over. I deeply felt the horrifying, stomach-dropping, terrifying sensation of complete weightlessness for a split second before I was thrown violently, completely out of control through the hot summer air. The hard, incredibly unforgiving, sun-baked concrete rushed up aggressively to precisely meet my fragile body. And right at that exact, terrifying, life-altering moment, looking over the broad shoulders of my loudly laughing, actively recording, deeply cruel family, I clearly saw the heavy wooden gate loudly click open. A distinguished man in a crisp navy blue polo shirt and wire-rimmed glasses stepped completely silently onto the green grass. He was casually holding a paper cup of gas station coffee. Dr. Harrison had finally arrived, and he was intently watching every single brutal second of it unfold. I hit the hard stone incredibly hard, my already damaged hip taking the absolute, unforgiving brunt of the brutal, forceful impact. The pain was an immediate, entirely blinding white flash that violently stole the remaining breath directly from my burning lungs. The cruel, mocking laughter of my entire extended family aggressively washed over me as Derek stood tall, heavily panting, victorious over my bleeding, broken body. "Stop faking for attention," Derek yelled down aggressively at me, pointing his finger like a loaded gun. "Get up." I honestly thought the worst was finally, mercifully over. I was so incredibly, dangerously wrong. The real, devastating storm hadn't even begun to truly break. The searing heat of the sun-baked concrete was the first thing that truly registered in my brain after the violent impact. I lay there on my side, my right leg twisted underneath me at an angle that defied basic human anatomy. The physical pain was not just a sensation. It was a loud, roaring entity inside my own head, drowning out the ambient noise of the suburban neighborhood. I tasted the heavy, metallic tang of blood in my mouth, Above me, Derek stood like a conquering gladiator. He had just violently assaulted his physically disabled younger brother in broad daylight, and he looked incredibly proud of himself. He looked down at me, his chest heaving, his face red with a sickening mixture of alcohol and pure adrenaline. I said, "Get up, Liam," Derek roared, pointing his thick finger down at my face. "Drop the pathetic act. Let's all watch you drop the act right now. The gravy train ends today. You are done stealing from our parents. You are done ruining my inheritance." I desperately tried to push myself up. I placed my bleeding palms flat against the rough patio stone. My arms shook violently under the immense weight of my own body. The muscles spasmed, completely failing to find any leverage. I collapsed back down, my cheek resting directly against the hot stone. And then, the most terrifying thing of all happened. The crowd did not gasp in horror. They did not rush forward to pull Derek away from me. They did not reach for their phones to call for an ambulance. They joined in, started with Aunt Brenda, the woman who had just dragged her ex-husband through a vicious, highly publicized divorce and a bitter custody battle, destroying his life over hidden financial assets, now found a new target to focus her endless venom on. She began to clap her hands together in a slow, rhythmic, mocking beat. "Stand up," she chanted loudly, her voice piercing the humid August air. Tyler, the cowardly cousin who had fabricated the entire grocery store lie to secure a bailout for his empty college fund, quickly chimed in, emboldened by the mob. "Yeah, stand up, Liam. We know you can do it." Within seconds, the entire backyard transformed from a standard Midwestern family reunion into a vicious, deeply primitive mob. My uncles, my aunts, my older cousins, the people who had attended my high school graduation, the people who had sat around Thanksgiving dinner tables with me for nearly 3 decades, all began to chant in unison. "Stand up, stand up, stand up." It was a wall of sound, 50 voices merging into one terrifying, rhythmic demand. Uncle Marcus was holding his expensive smartphone high in the air, the camera lens focused tightly on my bleeding face, actively recording my utter humiliation for his own twisted amusement. He was probably planning to show the video to his wealthy friends at the country club, laughing about how he helped expose a massive family fraud. I looked desperately through the forest of legs surrounding me, searching for one single face that held an ounce of humanity. I looked for my mother, Sylvia. She was standing frozen near the large sliding glass door of the kitchen. Her hands were covering her mouth. Tears were welling up in her eyes, but she did absolutely nothing. She did not step forward. She did not scream at Derek to stop. She watched her golden child, the son with the massive salary and the brilliant career, physically and psychologically destroy her youngest son. Her silence was the loudest, most violent weapon used against me that day. The pain in my spine was reaching a critical mass. The neuropathic fire in my right leg was burning so fiercely that I honestly thought I was going to lose consciousness. The dark edges of my vision were closing in rapidly. I closed my eyes, resigning myself to the brutal reality that I was completely, utterly alone in the world. My family was dead to me. This patio was the funeral for every single relationship I had ever valued. But the chanting suddenly stopped. It did not fade away gradually. It cut off instantly, like a thick, heavy cable being cleanly severed by a massive pair of bolt cutters. The sudden, absolute silence in the crowded backyard was incredibly jarring. The only sounds left were the sizzling of abandoned burgers burning on the hot grill and the distant, oblivious barking of a neighbor's dog. I painfully opened my eyes and slowly turned my head. Derek had frozen completely still. His aggressive posture had vanished. His jaw was slightly open, and he was staring wide-eyed over my body toward the back of the patio. Uncle Marcus had slowly lowered his recording smartphone, his arrogant smirk entirely wiped from his aging face. Aunt Brenda's hands were frozen mid-clap. A man had stepped directly into the center of the hostile circle. He was of average height, in his late 50s, with graying hair at his temples. He wore a simple, unbranded navy blue polo shirt, khaki trousers, and wire-rimmed glasses. He held a half-empty paper cup of cheap gas station coffee in his left hand. He looked completely ordinary, like a high school history teacher or a local accountant. But the aura of absolute, unwavering authority radiating from him was palpable. It was Dr. Harrison. He did not look angry. He looked completely, chillingly clinical. He looked at my family the exact same way a scientist observes a particularly disgusting colony of bacteria under a bright microscope. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee. He swallowed, cleared his throat softly, and looked directly into Derek's deeply flushed face. "Get your hands off my patient," Dr. Harrison said. His voice was not loud. He did not yell. But the tone was so heavily laden with absolute authority, so deeply saturated with cold, hard danger, that it carried clearly across the entire yard. Derek blinked rapidly, clearly deeply disoriented by this sudden, confident interruption. "Who the hell are you?" Derek demanded, trying desperately to inflate his chest and reclaim his lost dominance. "This is a private family residence. You are trespassing. Get the hell out of here before I call the police." Dr. Harrison ignored Derek entirely. He crouched down beside me on the hot concrete with the smooth, practiced grace of a man who had done it 10,000 times before. He completely ignored the blood on the stone. "Liam," he said softly, looking directly into my eyes, "rate the pain for me, 1 to 10. Be honest." 8. I whispered hoarsely, my voice cracking from the dry heat and the shock. "Maybe a 9. My hip." Dr. Harrison ran his highly trained, incredibly gentle hands along my right leg, expertly feeling the alignment of the joints through my jeans, carefully avoiding the expensive, complex leg brace. His expression hardened into a grim, deeply furious mask. Possible lateral collateral ligament tear on top of the existing structural trauma, Dr. Harrison announced, speaking more to himself than to me. He stood back up to his full height and turned slowly to face the terrified crowd of my relatives. He locked his cold, analytical eyes onto my mother, who was still cowering by the glass door. "Someone bring his wheelchair over here. Right now," Dr. Harrison commanded. For a long, tense second, absolutely nobody moved. They were all paralyzed by the sudden, terrifying shift in the power dynamic. Then my sister-in-law, Nora, practically ran across the patio, grabbed the heavy handles of my overturned wheelchair, righted it, and quickly rolled it over to us. She looked absolutely terrified. Dr. Harrison reached down, grabbed me securely by my belt and my left shoulder, and lifted my heavy body completely off the concrete and back into the padded seat of my chair with a single, practiced motion. "Now," Dr. Harrison said, turning his full, devastating attention back to Derek, "to answer your highly aggressive question. My name is Dr. Jonathan Harrison. I am the Chief of Orthopedic Surgery at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I am the lead surgeon who personally bolted your brother's shattered spine back together 28 months ago. The yard was so quiet you could hear the wind rustling the leaves in the oak trees." The color completely, rapidly drained from Derek's flushed face. He looked exactly like a man who had just stepped off a massive cliff in the dark and was currently waiting for the brutal impact. "I perform highly complex spinal fusions," Dr. Harrison continued, his voice echoing in the dead silence. "I oversee Liam's intensive physical therapy. I closely monitor his aggressive pain management protocols. I consult weekly with a team of leading neurologists regarding his heavily crushed sciatic nerve. I know every single millimeter of his medical reality." Uncle Marcus, trying desperately to salvage his shattered pride, aggressively puffed out his chest and took a bold step forward. "Well, doctor, you must be incredibly proud of your handiwork, because your supposedly paralyzed patient seems to walk around local grocery stores carrying heavy bags of dog food just fine when nobody is actively looking. We have eyewitnesses." Dr. Harrison slowly turned his head to look at Uncle Marcus. The doctor smiled, but the smile did not reach his cold eyes. It was a terrifying expression. "Ah, yes," Dr. Harrison said smoothly. "The famous grocery store miracle. Let us deeply examine that highly fascinating medical anomaly right now." Dr. Harrison casually reached into the front pocket of his khaki trousers and pulled out his sleek, large-screen smartphone. He held it up high over his head, aggressively facing the silent, captivated crowd. He tapped the screen twice. A high-resolution, starkly black-and-white X-ray image completely filled the bright screen. "This is Liam's lumbar spine," Dr. Harrison announced loudly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute, undeniable scientific truth. He spread 2 fingers across the glass screen to vividly zoom in on the complex image. "Do you see these bright, white vertical lines? Those are 4 solid titanium rods. And these thick shapes here, here, and here? Those are 12 massive surgical screws firmly anchored deeply into the bone. That is the massive spinal fusion that I personally performed during a brutal 7-hour surgery. The agonizing recovery process ran 6 solid months, and that was considered the highly optimistic, fast version." Absolutely nobody spoke. Nobody dared to even breathe too loudly. Aunt Brenda looked like she was going to be physically sick right there on the expensive patio furniture. "The strict medical reason Liam can currently stand for exactly 5 minutes during an intensive physical therapy session," Dr. Harrison continued relentlessly, "is that a highly dedicated team of medical professionals has spent over a year slowly, deliberately, and painfully retraining his severely traumatized body to simply manage incredibly short distances with a heavy walker. After roughly 40 meters, the permanent, irreversible nerve damage naturally produces a level of pure, electrical pain severe enough to force his body to a complete, uncontrollable stop." Dr. Harrison slowly swiped his thumb across the screen, revealing a highly detailed, vividly colorful MRI scan. "This dark, completely necrotic region right here is the right sciatic nerve," he pointed sharply. "That is permanent, irreversible, catastrophic damage from a massive 2-story fall onto scrap metal. It is the exact scientific reason his right leg possesses almost zero proprioception. It is the reason his leg simply violently gives out underneath him without warning. It is the reason there is no magical cure. This is the permanent, unchangeable rest of Liam's natural life. Every single day of it." Dr. Harrison lowered the phone slightly and looked directly, piercingly at Tyler, who was trying desperately to shrink backwards into the dense hedges. "So, to directly address the highly specific, incredibly malicious rumor regarding a 50-pound bag of dog food at a local Walmart," Dr. Harrison said, his voice dripping with pure, concentrated venom. "Unless your nephew possesses a secret, highly advanced medical degree, and somehow secretly completely regenerated a totally crushed central nerve ending in an afternoon, he is a pathological, manipulative liar who intentionally fabricated a dangerous story to further deeply fracture this broken family." Tyler visibly shook. He opened his mouth to aggressively defend himself, but no words came out. He looked at Derek for help, but Derek was staring blankly at the ground, utterly destroyed by the undeniable medical evidence. "But sure," Dr. Harrison said smoothly, his tone heavily layered with dark, biting sarcasm. "He is entirely faking it for the attention, because needing help to use a toilet and living in chronic, blinding agony is every young man's ultimate dream." Dr. Harrison raised the smartphone even higher into the air so the entire yard could clearly see the bright screen. He swiped one final, devastating time. "And then there is this highly interesting file," Dr. Harrison said. "I actually started recording high-definition video the exact moment I quietly walked through the wooden gate into this lovely, warm family gathering. That was exactly 9 minutes ago." He pressed play with his thumb. The volume on his phone was turned all the way up. Derek's own angry, aggressively drunken voice came loudly out of the small speakers, entirely unmistakable and incredibly damning. "Stop faking for attention. Get up." Then, the highly distinct, wet, sickening sound of my body violently hitting the hard stone patio echoed across the yard. The cruel, mocking laughter that immediately followed. Aunt Brenda's shrill voice initiating the horrific chant. The entire crowd joining in, rhythmically demanding that a permanently disabled man perform for their amusement. Dr. Harrison let the damning video run for a full, agonizing 30 seconds while 60 people were forced to stand completely still and actively listen to themselves commit a heinous act of group cruelty. And then he abruptly stopped the playback. "I recorded absolutely all of it," Dr. Harrison said calmly into the heavy, suffocating silence. "The unprovoked physical assault, the vicious verbal abuse, the coordinated group intimidation, the public, highly traumatic humiliation of a severely disabled man on the ground by his own blood relatives while uncles eagerly filmed it for fun." He slowly turned his head toward Uncle Marcus, who had aggressively shoved his own phone deep into his pocket and was currently backing slowly away toward his expensive Porsche. "You are absolutely not the only one who came here today to actively collect legal evidence, Marcus," Dr. Harrison said coldly. "And frankly, my footage is significantly better framed." Derek stumbled awkwardly backward and caught himself heavily on the edge of the large picnic table. "Wait," Derek stammered loudly, his voice cracking violently under the immense pressure. Everybody thought. The evidence. It all genuinely seemed." "You completely thought wrong, Derek," Dr. Harrison sharply cut him off, his voice dropping a few freezing, terrifying degrees. "No, let me formally correct that statement. You did not think at all. You did not actively ask one single basic question in 2.5 years. You did not request one single medical record. You did not pick up the phone and call one of his many doctors. You did not spend 10 minutes trying to understand what your own brother has been actively living through. You arrogantly decided he was a liar because it was significantly easier than accepting the fact that sometimes terrible, random things happen, and you simply did not want to be financially inconvenienced by his tragedy." Dr. Harrison reached deeply into his wallet and pulled out a crisp, heavy, white business card. He held it out directly toward Derek between two fingers. "That is my personal attorney, Clara Vance," Dr. Harrison announced loudly. "She is a senior managing partner at a massive downtown firm, and she aggressively handles high-profile disability rights litigation. She is incredibly ruthless, and she is very, very good at her job." Derek stared blankly at the little white card in Dr. Harrison's hand like it might physically bite him if he reached for it. He did not take it. Dr. Harrison simply set it down heavily on the picnic table instead. "I will be personally filing a detailed police report this evening for the highly aggravated assault of a severely disabled person," Dr. Harrison stated clearly, outlining the absolute destruction of Derek's future. Alongside it, Clara will be immediately filing a massive civil lawsuit for battery, intentional infliction of severe emotional distress, and coordinated group harassment. "I will be handing over my video evidence directly to the detectives." Dr. Harrison paused, letting the immense, crushing weight of the legal threats settle heavily over the terrified crowd. Then he delivered the absolute, final, devastating blow. "Furthermore," Dr. Harrison continued smoothly, "I strongly suggest you heavily consider how this highly documented incident is going to aggressively play out on the local news networks this week. Because this is precisely the kind of sensational, enraging story those stations aggressively run with for days. A disabled veteran, violently assaulted by his own wealthy, successful brother at a family reunion. He is not even a real veteran," Aunt Brenda foolishly blurted out, desperately grasping at absolutely any straw she could find. "He was just in the National Guard. Army National Guard honorably discharged." Dr. Harrison corrected her instantly, his smile as thin and sharp as a surgical scalpel. "Those official service records permanently live directly in the VA system, which fundamentally means this matter can aggressively become a federal issue incredibly quickly. Did you know that violently assaulting a disabled military veteran carries massive, enhanced felony penalties at the federal level? I didn't either, until Clara walked me through the entire penal code yesterday afternoon." Dead, terrifying silence. The burgers on the massive grill were fully, completely burning now, sending thick, black, noxious smoke curling high up into the bright August sky. Absolutely nobody reached over to flip them or pull them off the fire. Dr. Harrison moved smoothly around behind my heavy wheelchair and took the large rubber handles firmly in both hands. "We are officially leaving," Dr. Harrison said simply, dismissing the entire family as completely irrelevant. Liam has an urgent appointment at the emergency room, which I will be aggressively documenting tonight as directly assault-related injuries. Those massive medical bills will attach directly to the impending civil suit. The expensive leg brace is visibly damaged from the heavy fall. That is another $4,500. The chair frame is slightly bent. Call it $3,000 more. We will aggressively itemize absolutely every single cent of it. He started pushing me strongly up the concrete path toward the driveway. Behind us, 60 terrified, ruined relatives stood perfectly still in the exact same loose, broken circle. The exact same people who had happily chanted at me to stand up, who had aggressively called me a pathetic liar to my face, who had loudly applauded my brother for violently shoving me onto the hard concrete. All of them were slowly, painfully arriving at the horrifying understanding that the person they had just completely humiliated had professionally recorded every last one of them actively committing a hate crime in broad daylight. "Wait!" Derek's voice cracked cleanly down the middle, thick with absolute terror and impending doom. "Wait, Liam, please. I am incredibly sorry. I didn't know the truth. None of us knew the actual truth. Please." I did not turn my head around. Dr. Harrison kept pushing me steadily, relentlessly up the path. We reached the heavily modified van. Dr. Harrison expertly eased me carefully into the front passenger seat, quickly collapsed the heavy chair down, loaded it efficiently into the back, and came around to get in and start the powerful engine. Derek aggressively ran up across the manicured lawn and banged the flat of his heavy hand aggressively against my passenger side window. "Liam, please. I am so incredibly sorry. Please, just roll down the window and talk to me." I looked at him calmly through the thick glass. He was my older brother. He was the person I had shared a small bedroom with for 16 years. The person who had taught me how to throw a baseball in the park. The person who, exactly 20 minutes ago, had violently pushed me out of my wheelchair onto hard concrete in front of our entire extended family because he deeply cared more about his inheritance and his bloated ego than his own flesh and blood. I slowly pushed the button, lowering the electric window exactly 2 inches. "You deeply want to know the absolute worst part of all this, Derek?" I asked incredibly quietly. He nodded extremely fast, his eyes wide and utterly desperate, hanging entirely on my every word. "I literally called you 3 separate times right after the initial fusion surgery," I said coldly. "I left you highly detailed voicemails. I texted you the exact dates. I practically begged you to come to my medical appointments so you could explicitly hear the grim prognosis straight from him. I tipped my head a fraction of an inch toward Dr. Harrison in the driver's seat. I did that so you wouldn't have to simply take my word for any of it. But you never came. You never even called me back. You actively chose to boldly believe I was a manipulative con artist instead of accepting that your own brother was permanently, horribly hurt." "I just honestly thought," Derek stammered, fresh tears spilling down his red face. "No," I firmly interrupted him. "You absolutely did not think. That is the entire fundamental problem. You just wanted to protect your money." I rolled the heavy glass window back up firmly against his desperate hand. Dr. Harrison smoothly pulled the van out of the driveway and onto the quiet suburban street, and I actively watched my brother get smaller and smaller in the side mirror until the final turn took him completely away forever. "Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey." The bustling emergency room at Northwestern Memorial was absolutely packed for a Saturday evening. However, Dr. Harrison walked me straight through the crowded triage area, spoke incredibly quietly with the attending physician, a woman he obviously knew from medical conferences, and had me placed in a private exam room within exactly 20 minutes. The detailed scans officially confirmed Dr. Harrison's initial grim suspicion. I had suffered a severely torn lateral collateral ligament in my right knee from the violent impact. That meant another incredibly expensive, painful surgery scheduled for that coming Thursday. It meant another massive setback in the slow, grinding, deeply exhausting work of actively clawing back any tiny fraction of the mobility I had left. It meant weeks of grueling recovery. "Why did you really come to the house today?" I quietly asked Dr. Harrison while we sat in the sterile room waiting on the orthopedic consult to formally read the detailed films. He was incredibly quiet for a long moment, slowly turning his empty coffee cup over and over in his capable hands. "I have treated complex spinal trauma patients for over 26 years, he finally said, his voice heavy with experience. "I have watched more affluent, seemingly perfect families than I can actively count completely come apart over a devastating injury exactly like yours. I have watched them actively decide it is infinitely easier to believe someone is faking an injury than to accept that human life is terrifyingly random, and there is no specific villain to point a finger at to make it make sense. I came today so that your family would never, ever be able to use the excuse that they simply didn't know the truth." The official, highly detailed police report was filed first thing Monday morning. Detective Ray Brennan of the local police department formally called me late Tuesday afternoon. "I have thoroughly gone through the clear video footage, the doctor's sworn statement, the photographs of your injuries, and the extensive medical records," Detective Brennan stated over the phone. "I will be completely honest with you, Liam. This is about as incredibly clear-cut as one of these cases ever gets. Your older brother aggressively put his hands on you, violently pushed you out of your wheelchair, and caused a heavily documented new physical injury. In this state, that is formally classified as aggravated battery against a person with a severe physical disability. That is a Class 2 felony. What exactly happens now?" I asked, my heart pounding slightly. "We formally issue an active warrant. He will be physically arrested at his home or his workplace, then officially arraigned in front of a judge, probably inside of 48 hours. With video evidence this pristine, the aggressive state's attorney will rapidly move forward whether or not you personally want to pursue it. I want you fully prepared for the fallout." "I am completely prepared," I said, entirely lacking hesitation. Derek was officially arrested very publicly on Wednesday morning. 2 uniformed officers walked directly into the glass-walled corporate lobby of his massive logistics firm, handcuffed him loudly in front of his entire sales team and several major clients, and marched him out to a waiting squad car. He posted a massive cash bail by that same late afternoon. His expensive, slick defense lawyer, some high-priced personal injury guy he knew from his exclusive country club, desperately called me early Thursday morning at my apartment. "My deeply remorseful client wants to actively apologize and make all of this right financially," the lawyer said smoothly, dripping with fake charm. "He is absolutely devastated by his actions. If you would be highly willing to ask the aggressive state prosecutor to quietly drop the felony charges, this massive misunderstanding could all go away completely quietly." "I am not the one aggressively pressing the charges," I said coldly. "The state is prosecuting him. You should probably talk to them." Right, the lawyer quickly pivoted. "But if you officially went on the legal record firmly telling them this was all just a minor misunderstanding between 2 brothers who had a little too much to drink." "It absolutely wasn't a misunderstanding," I interrupted sharply. "It was a violent assault, clearly recorded on high-definition video, in front of 60 willing witnesses, with a pristine audio recording of him loudly saying my name and demanding I stand up. There is absolutely zero gray area in this event. He intentionally pushed me out of my wheelchair because he firmly decided I was faking a disability to steal his inheritance. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a choice he actively made out loud. Have a nice day." I hung up the phone aggressively. The massive, highly coordinated civil lawsuit was officially filed that Friday morning. Clara Vance, the ruthless attorney Dr. Harrison had recommended, sat firmly across a massive mahogany desk from me in a sleek downtown office with a wide window full of the gray Chicago skyline. "We are aggressively suing Derek individually for severe battery and intentional infliction of extreme emotional distress," Clara stated clearly, sliding a thick, heavy folder across the desk to me. "That part is entirely straightforward. The evidence is bulletproof. but I deeply want to talk to you about something significantly bigger, if you will let me. What exactly do you mean by bigger? Your Uncle Marcus, your Aunt Brenda, every single adult relative who actively joined that horrific chant. Clara leaned forward intensely over the desk. They actively created a coordinated, highly hostile situation and eagerly participated in the targeted harassment of a disabled person. Under the strict laws in this state, that is highly actionable. And I can legally name every single one of them as co-defendants in this lawsuit. You want me to officially sue my entire extended family? I want you to send a massive, undeniable message that actually lands and stays permanently landed, she said passionately. Liam, I have personally handled hundreds of these exact cases. Disabled individuals violently abused, falsely accused, and deeply isolated by their own relatives who have quietly decided they are faking for money. It is far more common than anyone wants to admit, and it almost never gets formally reported. You know exactly why? Because the disabled person is usually isolated, financially dependent on the abusers, and utterly terrified of losing the only weak support system they have. So, they stay quiet, and the abuse gets worse. They stay quiet, I repeated softly. But you do not have to, Clara firmly stated. You have something almost none of my clients ever have. You have impeccable documentation. You have a highly respected surgeon willing to walk into a federal courtroom and forcefully testify. You have a crystal clear video of the entire horrific event. You have the ultimate ability to aggressively drag this out of the dark shadows and directly into the harsh light on your specific terms. The shocking story violently broke on the local evening news that upcoming weekend. Disabled veteran violently assaulted by wealthy brother at family reunion. Surgeon recorded everything on camera. The heavily blurred footage went up aggressively online early Monday morning. Faces were carefully blurred out by the news station's legal team to avoid defamation, except for Derek's flushed face and mine. But you could still clearly see the violent push, the terrifying fall, hear his arrogant voice, and hear the horrific group chant rapidly rise up behind him. The video hit 3 million viral views by late Tuesday night. The massive national media outlets had the story by Wednesday. By Thursday, I was politely declining lucrative interview offers from national morning shows. I absolutely did not want to be famous. I had only ever wanted one specific thing for 28 months, to be believed. And Derek's perfectly curated, highly expensive life completely came apart exponentially faster than any slow criminal trial ever could have managed. The logistics firm he worked for saw the viral video. They immediately suspended him on Tuesday morning, severely citing a massive violation of their strict corporate morality clause, and formally terminated his high-salary employment by the end of that exact same week. He lost his massive income, his stock options, and his pristine reputation. His beautiful fiancée, Nora, quietly packed her bags, formally called off the expensive, highly planned wedding, and rapidly moved out of their luxury downtown apartment, terrified of being publicly associated with a viral abuser. His wealthy friends completely stopped answering his desperate texts one by one, and his full name, eagerly typed into any search bar by any future employer, landlord, or potential date, prominently returned the exact same 30-second video clip forever permanently anchored at the top of the search results. The vice president who violently pushed his disabled brother out of a wheelchair. During the aggressive discovery phase of our civil lawsuit, Clara's relentless forensic accountants unearthed the final, massive twist that completely destroyed the family dynamic forever. While aggressively digging through Derek's financial records to determine his capacity to pay a massive settlement, Clara uncovered the absolute truth about his deep hatred for me. Derek had been actively embezzling massive amounts of money from my parents' extensive retirement accounts and their lucrative real estate portfolio for nearly 3 years to heavily fund his own extravagant, wildly unsustainable lifestyle. He didn't violently hate me because my medical bills were a financial burden. He hated me because he was absolutely terrified that if my parents ever had to deeply audit their accounts to pay for my extensive care, they would immediately discover the massive financial crater he had secretly dug. He fabricated the narrative that I was a fraud completely out of sheer, desperate financial panic, eagerly projecting his own massive thievery directly onto me. My mother, Sylvia, desperately called me exactly 3 weeks after the disastrous family reunion. He is completely ruined, Liam, she sobbed hysterically into the phone. He lost the massive luxury apartment. He cannot get hired absolutely anywhere. Not with that horrific video out there with his clear face on it. He is facing actual prison time. He is your brother. Isn't there anything you can possibly do to stop this? Like what exactly, Mom? I asked coldly. Call the state prosecutor? Tell them it was a funny joke? Tell them I forgive him for violently assaulting me? Yes, she cried out desperately. They will absolutely listen to you. Please, Liam. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I said again, as gently but firmly as I possibly could. He violently assaulted me in front of 60 people while I was already severely disabled and actively bleeding on the ground. He also secretly stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from your personal retirement accounts to buy expensive watches and luxury cars. That is not a mistake he made. That is a long series of deliberate choices he aggressively made with complete malice. So, you are just going to completely stand by and watch your own brother's entire life be totally destroyed? She demanded angrily, shifting the ultimate blame back onto me. I thought about that accusatory question for a long, defining moment, looking down at my damaged legs, at the expensive custom brace, at the heavy wheels of my chair. No, Mom, I said with finality. I am going to firmly let him actively live with the severe consequences of the terrible things he consciously chose to do. And I am completely done pretending I owe any of you a damn thing. I firmly hung up the phone without saying goodbye, effectively and permanently cutting the final, toxic cord tying me to that family. The massive legal settlement officially came 4 grueling months later. Derek, completely cornered by the undeniable video and the crushing financial embezzlement evidence, formally pleaded guilty to the severe charge of aggravated battery against a disabled person. To avoid actual prison time, he desperately took 3 years of strict probation, 500 hours of grueling community service, mandatory intensive court-ordered anger management classes, and a heavily suspended sentence that would instantly land him in a federal cell the very second he put a single foot out of line. He also had a permanent felony conviction on his record, ensuring he would never work in high-level corporate finance ever again. The massive civil suit against Derek and the participating family members settled out of court for a staggering sum. They actively liquidated real estate, emptied remaining college funds, and drained savings accounts just to avoid a humiliating, highly publicized public trial. The massive settlement fully covered all my past exorbitant medical bills, compensated for my intense pain and suffering, fully funded all of my future advanced physical therapy needs, and provided massive punitive damages firmly bearing my name. Derek would effectively be aggressively paying that massive debt down out of whatever low-wage manual labor work he could manage to find for the rest of his natural life. Aunt Brenda and Uncle Marcus were financially devastated by their portion of the settlement, and the resulting intense family infighting completely and utterly shattered whatever fragile bonds they had left. The family was entirely broken, deeply trapped in a toxic, bitter mess of their own, loudly blaming each other for the complete loss of their hoarded wealth and highly prized social status. Clara Vance officially called me on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, the exact day the final, binding legal document was signed and officially filed with the high courts. "It is completely done, Liam," she said, her voice laced with deep, professional satisfaction. "All of it is secured. The funds are actively transferring to your secure accounts. How does that truly feel?" I sat quietly in my new, entirely fully accessible, brightly lit apartment. I slowly wheeled myself over to the large bay window and looked out at the bustling, vibrant street below. I felt the dull, familiar, constant burning ache in my right leg, but for the first time in almost 3 long years, the heavy, suffocating weight on my chest was completely, entirely gone. "They believe me now," I said softly into the phone. "That is honestly all I ever genuinely wanted out of any of this nightmare. For someone to simply believe me." "They will never be able to forget it either," Clara correctly noted. "I used the massive settlement money to fully regain absolute, total independence. I purchased a highly advanced, top-of-the-line wheelchair that allowed me to easily navigate any terrain. I hired the absolute best, most expensive physical therapists in the city to actively work with me 3 times a week. I completely cut off all contact with my parents, Derek, Tyler, and the rest of the deeply toxic relatives who had stood on that patio and eagerly cheered for my destruction. I finally realized that blood does not automatically make a family. True family is actively defined by basic, fundamental respect, deep empathy, and the absolute willingness to fiercely protect one another when things get terrifyingly dark. My family consisted of Dr. Harrison, who stood firmly in the gap when I was utterly defenseless. It consisted of Clara, who ruthlessly fought for my legal dignity. And most importantly, it consisted of myself, because I finally found the immense strength to forcefully set a permanent, uncrossable boundary and demand the respect I inherently deserved as a human being. Derek thought he was physically pushing a pathetic, weak burden onto the hard concrete that day. He had absolutely no idea he was actively providing the exact catalyst I needed to firmly rise up and legally burn his entire fraudulent empire to the ground. He wanted everyone to completely see the truth, and in the end, that is exactly what happened. They saw exactly who he was, and they saw exactly who I was. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It's not easy to revisit these dark moments, but I share them because I know someone out there is struggling with a family that refuses to see their pain. Never let anyone, especially your own blood, convince you that your reality isn't valid. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? A situation where they chose their comfort over your truth? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Stay strong.